I mean, the first time a teacher, a purported, economics teacher, asserted that circulatory inflation caused price inflation, I immediately raised my hand. And I disproved that it was even possible to suffer circulatory inflation if debts were collateralized. Simple as that. How can you introduce more money into circulation than the value of represented wealth when you can only introduce so much as the value of represented wealth? And when you have to pay it out of circulation with interest, it's impossible. In less than the lifespan of the related property, no less. It's impossible to have circulatory inflation. Well, people like Ron Paul are crying, oh, look how much money they're putting into circulation. We have to have circulatory inflation. Bullshit. Where's your arithmetic? How much are we paying out of circulation on this monumental sum of artificial falsified indebtedness we've accumulated inevitably as a consequence of the obfuscation of the currency, which you advocate in your preposterous proposition of competing banks, Ron Paul? Stupid is as stupid does. Unless you're accounting for how much we're paying out of circulation, what's being introduced to circulation doesn't establish how much the circulation is increasing. For crying out loud, if you got a dam and you had a lake there, and you go, oh my God, there's all these floodwaters flowing into the lake, that means the lake's got to rise above the dam, but they've got the dam open enough to let all that water out even faster than it's coming in. Sorry, no overflow of the dam, pal. Simple as that. And where did you ever hear Ron Paul or his many dire advocates or supporters ever explain how much money is coming into circulation against how much is being paid out? For which, of course, you would complain instead about the obfuscation of the currency, because you'd say, well, yeah, they're pouring more and more and more ever into circulation. But in truth, we're not awash in money. No one has any money. That's why we have the problems we do. That's part of it. The other part is that we have this escalated obligation to service this incredible escalating sum of artificial indebtedness. And who is this to? It's to people who produce nothing, and people like Paul Greenone in Money is Dead are borrowing my explanation for this. And why did you come to this? You came to this, the original author of the idea that he's borrowing and pretending to be authority by is yours truly here. But why? Because it comes from understanding the obfuscation of the currency. And Paul Greenone isn't giving you that, and of course he can't, because it's plagiarism, you see. So while he's morphing, he's trying to account for the faults of this, which I've raised, for years now. He's unable to do so because he made a huge error. He named the damn thing Money is Debt. He kept, by needing it to be recognized perpetually by this preposterous title, which is the greatest evidence, the most blatant evidence of all of his misunderstanding and lack of mastery of the issues, he's perpetuated the faults in just the title alone. And so he becomes forever responsible to that inability to deliver the answer. And he's doing this for money, as you would understand if you went to his website. So what do we do when the passenger aside us ascends from the bowels of the ship to go notify the captain that an emergency is occurring down at the keel of the ship, when we know full well from our own observations, if we make the right observations, the complete assessment of the issues, what do? We leave it to someone else to take over and possibly misexplain the circumstances to the captain so that the captain may react in the wrong way, which would be the right way to the misexplanation of the issues at hand, dismasting the ship, crippling it in these heavy seas. Does it matter who this person is who's going to the captain, who may have just rose from their bunk and just happened to notice all this going on? They're awakened by the commotion. Largely, the assessments have already been made by the people that need to make them. This person wasn't even listening, has only glanced at the issues, and they rush off to notify the captain. Is it important that we perceive what they may convey may be misleading and may result in transforming a situation which would be under control if the repairs are allowed to transpire as they've been planned, but would result in a catastrophe if in fact the captain did the wrong thing? Well, of course it's important to realize that if this person just jumps out of their bunk in a panic and rushes off, it's important for us to realize that saying the wrong thing really, really matters to everyone on the vessel. So the question here is, what is the authority of this producer of this video? What are their motives? Are they true to the issues? Is their research, if any, valid? Or are they conveying some kind of conglomeration or compromise of let's say, conventional economic thinking, somehow compromising actual solution to some, midpoint or point somewhere in between, what will solve our problems and what will not? Especially when only actual solution solves all of the issues before us. Of course, it's important. So what do we find when we visit this person's web pages? We find that this fellow Paul Greenone is not at least is not visibly. There's no body of work presented which is attributable to him, which would in its sum convey even that he's contributing anything further to, let's say, the development of an actual science of economics, which we can, of course, assert has already transpired long before the day of the advent of this Money is Debt video. So we find he's an artist. Has he produced any comprehensive models? Could he have projected failure by understanding the obfuscation of the currency from, say, 1983 or 4, and actually calculate how long it would take for this obfuscation of the currency to impose terminal monetary failure? No such thing there. Is it evident that he would even respect such a fact? If so, why would he come up with this presentation attributing the issue to debt, when in fact money is not issued as a debt? It's a falsified debt. It is not a debt to the banks. Isn't that far more important to understand? That it is not a debt, that it's an obligation to pay and retire principal? If we follow his assertion, what are we to do but outlaw debt, eradicate debt, prevent credit from sustaining all of the prosperity which would be sustained by certifying the creditworthiness of our newlywed couple, that we provide the markets for industries such as this production of a $100,000 home, which indeed they can afford to occupy and pay for the consumption of it over their lifetimes from the beginning rather than in the end, which would be the case if we prevented credit from existing, or debt, as this preposterous idea that our problems derive from the nature of money being debt. So it's incredibly important, in fact, for us to understand these differences. They may seem subtle to someone who's listening to this. You might think, oh, big deal. It's not a debt. It's a promissory obligation. It's a huge difference. You see, because if you're advocating elimination of debt, you're preventing us from sustaining monetarily all of the industry that we can sustain if and only if we perfect this concept of credit and, in truth, the natural obligations of a promissory obligation. No more than that. So there's a huge difference between the two. And this difference is introduced merely to avoid plagiarism, or to attempt to avoid plagiarism, because many of these ideas can't even have no validity whatsoever. But in the original ideas which I introduced, that interest is terminal, no one was claiming that interest was terminal in 1970, for crying out loud. No one was predicting a second Great Depression from the obfuscation of the currency. No one was calculating it. No one was putting out computer models, before or since even, which actually are capable of calculating the maximum possible lifespan of any economy, not based on debt, based on interest-bearing debt. An obfuscation of the currency subject to interest. It's the interest which is terminal. Our issues aren't terminal simply because money was issued as a debt, but because the debt was obfuscated into a falsified debt to banks, which never even gave up any lawful consideration, which in turn means that there's no justification whatsoever for interest, which is the critical fault or proposition which multiplies debt, just debt, which could profit us in that it sustains all the prosperity that we're capable of. Debt of only principal. Interest multiplies that, which is not even a debt, but an obligation to pay principal and to retire principal out of circulation. Interest multiplies the obfuscated debt, the falsified debt, into terminal debt. The idea of the debt is a lie. It isn't that money is issued as a debt. Money is still issued as a promissory obligation. The obfuscation of the currency falsifies the obligation to pay and retire principal into a falsified debt to the banks. So to say that debt is the issue is wrong. It's interest which multiplies debt into terminal debt. All the debt we have isn't because money is issued as a debt. All the debt that we suffer is instead the result of multiplying artificial indebtedness into terminal indebtedness by this implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation. A thing that all these plagiarists, that these pages of Richard Grignon, who has produced this video, Money is Debt. All the plagiarists that he lists have contested